Hey, it looks like most of us have joined. Welcome to the 2023 virtual annual meeting of the National Name Exchange Institutional Contacts. My name is Matthew Linton, Senior Manager for Programs and Publications here at the Council of Graduate Schools. And I also, in that role, manage the National Name Exchange. I imagine many of you have talked to me via email about this program at some point in time over the last year or so. But if you're a new coordinator, welcome. We're very excited to have you on board. So before we get started with the presentation themselves, just want to give a few logistical notes. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording as well as the presentation slides will be made available to NNE coordinators via email. Remember, this is a meeting, a Zoom meeting. This is not a Zoom webinar. So please be mindful about muting yourself when you're not speaking, because it can be confusing for users if people don't mute themselves. And then remember, the chat is open, so please use the chat to share links, ask questions, introduce yourself, continue discussion. We really want to hear from you, and we really think of this as a community atmosphere. So we hope that you get to know one another as well as us. Just a little plan for the day before I pass the baton over. We're going to begin with an introduction and welcome from Suzanne Ortega, President of the Council of Graduate Schools. And then we're going to have a new program staff introduction announcement to make, followed by our two presentations. So first, it's going to be an overview of the 2023 National Name Exchange enrollment cycle. That'll be followed by an audience Q&A. And then we're going to have another presentation about what's new and upcoming for 2024 and beyond for the National Name Exchange. And then we'll close the meeting with some breakout rooms that will allow us to discuss some questions that we have for you, as well as provide a networking opportunity for NNE coordinators. And so with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Suzanne Ortega, President of the Council of Graduate Schools. Suzanne.
Thanks, Matt. Colleagues, thanks so much for joining us today. I was reminded in thinking about this meeting that the National Name Exchange has been in existence for, I think, 57 years. And I first got to know really intimately the National Name Exchange was when I was the graduate dean at University of Washington, who for so many years managed the National Name Exchange. You know, this is the second year for CGS managing the project. And I'm reminded time and time again that the purpose for which NNE was created, to broaden access to participation in and supporting the matriculation of students who have been historically and continue to be underrepresented in graduate education, has never been more important. And I think while progress has been slower than we'd like, it has been progress, to be sure. And NNE is a huge part of the underlying support that helps us with our diversity and inclusion agenda. As I said, this is the second year, I expect you know, of CGS managing NNE. And I'm really proud of the work that Matt and Allie and Trinae and others in CGS, and mostly you, have done to expand the number of institutions participating in NNE. And to increase the number of students. There are now 93 institutions participating, and there were 7,509 students enrolled. This year, we added master's students, a really important expansion, I think, for those students who have completed a master's degree at an institution that does not offer the PhD in their field or their desired field. And perhaps you saw my note last week. We are really thrilled that the National Science Foundation, too, sees the value of NNE and has invested considerable funds over the next 5 years to support its growth and its refinement. I think what's really interesting about, well, there's a lot of things interesting about this project. One is it takes very seriously the key role that campus supporters play in making sure that they identify highly qualified participants who somehow might be under the radar screen of honors programs or other traditional ways we have of recognizing excellence. It really looks to the key role that you as a community play in supporting one another's work. We're really pleased that the grant will make it possible to have some face-to-face convenings to keep that sense of community going. We're also really excited about the opportunity to create some student-facing resources that help demystify some of the application process. Things like navigating financial aid or understanding how to pay for a degree. Things about sort of career opportunities that sit at the other end of graduate education. So the new set of tools are really important. And I think in nested in another important addition, certainly we have never faced greater challenges for ensuring that students from racially and ethnically underrepresented backgrounds continue to know they are valued and they're wanted. That we certainly need to ensure a laser sharp focus on increasing their participation. At the same time, we can do so recognizing in the current political context that a more, I'll use the word capacious view of diversity is in order. There are certainly groups, low socioeconomic status would be one really good example, first-gen students. I often think of community college transfer students as a group that have been often under-identified and involved in graduate education. So the expansion of the opportunity to include students who have a variety of characteristics that would be important to contribute to the diversity agendas of our universities seems to me a really powerful new opportunity. So again, we know that this work has persisted because of its impact and because of the commitment of all of you who have spent years supporting students and nurturing talent. So we are going to send a survey, I think later, forgive me, Matt, I've forgotten the timeline. We want to know a little bit more about how, from your perspective, we can make this tool easier to use for you as campus coordinators, but also for your students. So keep a lookout for that. And I just end by saying, we're really proud of the things we've managed to accomplish collectively, we as the whole community. But we are really excited about the opportunity to have new resources and to steward this valuable resource and grow it as the need remains critical. So I'm going to be quiet now, turn the podium, such as it is, back to my colleagues, and then we will give our presentation and look forward to the conversation. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. So before we get too deep into the presentations, I want to have an opportunity for my colleague, Ali Robert, to come on and introduce herself. She's the program associate, and you're going to be talking to her a lot over the next year as she gets onboarded onto this project. So Ali, if you want to come on and just let people see you and know who you are.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. As Matt said, I have just joined CGS as the program associate. And I'm very excited to be working on this project with him and Suzanne and so many others on CGS. And my role with the National Name Exchange will be to help develop some of the web content and student-facing resources, and to help answer any questions that any of you may have. So I really look forward to getting to know you and hearing your thoughts over the next couple months and during this meeting.
Great, thank you, Ali. I'm not sure if she's on, but Trinae Hardy, if she's on as well, if you would just come on and introduce yourself. I don't know if she's, oh, she is, okay, yeah.
She's here,
Trinae,
Matt.
if you'd introduce yourself as well. Trinae is going to be playing a really important role in analyzing some of this research and data to make sure that this project is accomplishing what the National Science Foundation is looking for. So Trinae, if you're able to unmute yourself and just introduce yourself to the group, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. I'll keep this brief because my connection is not very good. But my name is Trinae Hardy. I just joined the team last month, and I'm really excited to work with you all on this project.
Thank you, Trinae. Okay, great. So now we're going to get started with the presentations for today. So I want to begin with just a kind of a brief overview of what the National Name Exchange is. So this is not going to be a full comprehensive how to use the National Name Exchange, how to get started with the National Name Exchange. We're going to be doing a full orientation for new coordinators into the National Name Exchange at the beginning of 2024. So look out for that invitation. Should be coming later in the year. But I just want to provide just a broad overview for folks who may be new or who may need a refresher. So the National Name Exchange was created in 1976, and as Suzanne mentioned, and it was hosted by the University of Washington until 2022. The founding mission of the exchange was to create opportunities for ethnically and racially underrepresented students to gain access to graduate education. The Council of Graduate Schools is a membership association of nearly 500 institutions in the United States and Canada, and we're led by graduate deans or their equivalent. The 2022 cycle was the first National Name Exchange cycle that was managed by the Council of Graduate Schools, and so the 2023 cycle is the second cycle that we have managed. To give an idea of like what institutions are able to participate, who can participate in NNE. So the National Name Exchange is a Council of Graduate Schools member benefit. So participating institutions must be CGS members in good standing. In order to participate fully in the cycle, an institution must contribute names to the exchange in order to access the student list for recruitment purposes. Students that are sophomores, juniors, seniors, gap year students, and master's students may all join the National Name Exchange. And it's currently open to institutions in the United States and Canada. The annual enrollment cycle for the National Name Exchange runs from March through June in a given year. Students who enroll or who are nominated must be domestic students from either the US or Canada and from a group historically underrepresented in higher education. Institutions gain access to the student list for recruitment once they begin enrolling students in the NNE student. And then finally, students self-enroll in NNE. National Name Exchange coordinators do not enroll students directly or put student data directly into the National Name Exchange. And so if you're, if this seems all very new and challenging, there will be much more detail about this in the orientation in January about how this entire process works. But I just wanted to provide a little bit of baseline information before we moved over into the 2023 National Name Exchange summary. And so this is kind of the broad data overview from the previous enrollment year. So as Suzanne mentioned, we're really excited that we had 93 schools participate this year, which is up from 76 in the previous year. The biggest two challenges are we're still looking to try to increase our minority serving institution participation. We had only 10 minority serving institutions participate in 2023, and we had only one historically Black college and university. So we're going to be looking to broaden that participation and bring more of those institutions into the National Name Exchange in 2023. We're also, as you have probably heard in the emails, we're trying to get the word out to our NNE enrollees about institutions that offer application fee waivers to NNE students. So if you are an institution that has that opportunity for students, please do let us know so we can make sure to indicate that on our website. It is one of the benefits of National Name Exchange for students. And below is the list in the slide of the participating institutions. So a broad overview of the 2023 enrollment. So as Suzanne mentioned, we had 7,509 students enroll in 2023. As the figure shows, that's up from last year where we had 6,026, and it gets us more in line with when the University of Washington was managing the resource prior to us taking it over in 2022. The class breakdown, the largest number of students were participating from the class of 2024, where we had 2,667 student participants. We were pleased to see that we actually had 50 gap year students from 2022 participate in this cycle. We've always been trying to figure out how to best communicate with gap year students. And so we'd love to hear from you about some strategies, whether it's through alumni networks or other resources about how we can get in contact with those students. Because we do know that many students do take at least some time between their undergraduate and graduate years. Overall, the enrollment increased in 2023, 24.6% increase over 2022. 33% of enrollees this year had some sort of research experience indicated. That's actually down from 45% last year. So we're going to be monitoring that over the next year to see kind of maybe why that is. As Suzanne mentioned, this was the first year we had master's students eligible to participate in the National Name Exchange, and we had 354 master's students enrolled. Most of those master's students were from just a few institutions. So we're hoping that as we communicate the 2024 cycle, that will be a little bit clearer that master's students can participate, and hopefully can get more institutions contributing master's students that are interested in PhDs or other master's degrees into the National Name Exchange, because we do know that that is another potential challenging pathway for master's. So, moving on to the National Name Exchange enrollment for 2023 by race ethnicity, we saw overall numbers were up across the board, right? Because we had significantly higher enrollment than last year. But we did see that the percentage of Latinx enrollees decreased from 30.5% to 30.5% from 35%, as well as the percentage of African Americans decreased from 25% to 22.3%. Asian American participation increased this cycle from 19% to 27.5%. One thing that we are monitoring a little bit here is that we saw a pretty steep decline in American Indian participation. And so I'll show you, you'll see on the next slide kind of what that looks like. But you can see we only had 104 individuals identify as their primary race ethnicity as American Indian. And we also had very low participation from Pacific Islanders as well. That low American Indian participation does dovetail a little bit with some declines in Indigenous first-time enrollment that we saw last year as part of our graduate enrollment and degrees report. And so I'm wondering a little bit if this may be a trend that we need to monitor going forward. But there may be some other factors that we need to think about. So one is that we have not had the same list of institutional participants this year that we did last year. And we did have at least one campus that participated last year that did not participate this year. That really made enrolling Indigenous students the focus of their communications. So that may be contributing to part of it. The other is that there were definitely some errors in last year's data of individuals who are of India, the nation descent, misidentifying themselves as American Indians. So there may be some needing to think about the ways that we discuss the demographics of that population to clarify it. We also found that we added multi-ethnic this year in the 2023 cycle. And as you can see, there were 599 individuals that identified as multi-ethnic. 25 of those individuals, at least part of their multi-ethnic identity was American Indian. So there's a bunch of competing factors, I think, going on here, but it is something that we need to think about. We've also seen that there have been a low number of African American men enrolling. So that's something that we need to think a little bit about going forward. So we had 1,673, we had 1,673 African American enrollees in this cycle, but we only had 481 that self-identified as male. So that's another thing that we're thinking about and looking at as we go forward, particularly as we start to think about trying to recruit more HBCUs into this community. So you can see this is just another way of representing the data here. You can see the decline in American Indian enrollment this year is something that really sticks out, as well as the other category. And so the decline in the other category is pretty easily explained. We noted that really there should be some sort of multi-ethnic identifier when we looked at last year's cycle. And so we added that into this year, and we had a lot of individuals identify as multi-ethnic. So I think that explains most of the decline in the other category for this. Okay. So moving on to gender participation in the 2023 cycle. So as you can see here, the vast majority of individuals who enrolled in the National Name Exchange in 2023 self-identified as women, so 61.1%, compared to 34.6% of men. This was also the first cycle in which we added non-binary as a category. And so we had 216 individuals identify as non-binary this past year. So we're really happy that we had actually so many individuals identify as non-binary. It's something that's been needed to be added to the exchange for several years as an option. One thing that I noted when I was going over the data was that there was quite a bit of certain fields really seemed to gravitate towards certain genders over others, or had a lot more enrollees from certain genders over others. So for women, the number one field of interest was psychology as their graduate field of interest with 457. And that was followed by business administration and public health. For men, the top field was information and computer science, and then that was followed by business administration. For non-binary enrollees, information and computer science was the primary field. But one thing that I noticed as I was going through the data is that there are a lot of women in this data set, but despite the large number of women enrolled, there are actually still fewer women that expressed an interest in computer science than men. So we had 194 women express interest in information and computer science as a primary graduate field of interest this cycle, compared to 354 men, despite having so many more women enrolled this year. So that really shows the way in which women in STEM and certain professional fields continue to be underrepresented. At the same time, there were fields in which men were very underrepresented, particularly in the social sciences. And so the one that really jumped out was clinical psychology. So clinical psychology had 192 women express interest in clinical psychology as a primary field of interest, compared to only 27 men that expressed that as a. So, there's a lot of discrepancy going on here if you look at gender and field of interest. And that moves us on to just generally looking at broad field of study here. So as you can tell, it's kind of another case of a rising tide rises all ships, pretty much up across the board. You'll note that the two fields that kind of jump out a little bit are the arts and humanities did not show a real significant growth as a broad field compared to some of the others. This is very much in line with what we've been seeing in other data sets about the slow growth or even small shrinkage of some arts and humanities fields over the past several years. And then the other field is agriculture, which we've always just seemed to have really small numbers for. And I think maybe this is to do some with institutional participation. But it'll be interesting to see if we were able to recruit some more agricultural oriented institutions into the National Name Exchange if those numbers really skyrocketed. So I'm not quite sure why that's the case. A lot of the growth happened in the social and behavioral sciences and the professional fields. And the social and behavioral sciences, fields like econ and political science remain important drivers. And then in the professional fields, business administration remains a large field. So those are just some of the high level data points from the broad fields of study. But as you can see here, we had so much overall growth that it kind of brought all the fields up. So stepping back from that information, kind of where do we feel like we did well in 2023, and then where do we feel like there's room for improvement? So overall, I think the biggest win was about increasing the number of institutional participants from 76 to 93. I think when we did the changeover from the University of Washington to CGS managing NNE, we lost connection with some coordinators. And so it was great that we were able to reestablish a lot of those connections this year. So we got institutions that had participated historically kind of back into the fold. And we did that in a number of different ways, running items about the National Name Exchange and News Network, as well as GradEdge, which are two of our largest newsletters, helped us reach out to folks that were part of the CGS community who may not have been involved in NNE in the past. We were able to communicate to them that this is something your institution should be participating in, and they were able to reconnect us to an NNE coordinator that had maybe got lost. I also discussed NNE quite a bit at our meetings, which was helpful because it was a good one-on-one or in-person opportunity to communicate the value of the National Name Exchange to CGS member institutions, as well as to let folks know you think that you're participating in NNE, but your institution isn't, which I found was pretty common. And generally, we communicated much more frequently with NNE coordinators this year. It's something that we're going to continue to do, particularly now that we have Allie in the fold and we have some more staff support to help us with that messaging. The other thing that I think was a big success this year was adding master's students to NNE. This is something that we heard from a lot of you last year that you would like to see included in the National Name Exchange. We had a few institutions that could not participate in the National Name Exchange because they didn't have undergraduate students. So even though we didn't enroll a huge number of students, it showed that we could do it and that there were institutions that would be interested in enrolling master's students into the exchange and that they would sign up. We weren't really sure if a master's student would be interested in participating in the National Name Exchange, but we found that at least some master's students were interested. But we're still really interested in the next year in how we can better connect with master's students. Is there messaging that is unique to master's students that may not work for undergraduates? And so how can we kind of tailor some of our messaging about the value of the National Name Exchange for those who already are in a graduate degree program about why it's relevant to them and why they should. Expanding the National Name Exchange Coordinator Network has been huge for us this year. That's part of the kind of increasing the number of participating institutions. But we grew the number of coordinators from 152 in 2022 to 216 this year. Some of that are, we have multiple coordinators at a few institutions, but a lot of those are new institutions that we were not connected with. And so that's really important as we look to grow this network over the next several years. And then finally, just getting the National Name Exchange annual cycle back on its correct timeline. So folks who were here last year and the 2022 cycle may remember we had some technology issues that meant that we weren't able to launch the exchange until June. And so we had a lot of challenges in that cycle about connecting with students over the summer. That students may not check their email in the best of times, but particularly not over the summer months. And so making it so that we started in March this year was really helpful in getting some of that early enrollment in, and particularly for students that were graduating in 2023, giving them the opportunity to get it before graduation. So those are the things that we did well, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. So where are some areas that we're looking to improve in 2024? So I think a big thing that we've heard, and I'm sure we'll hear some about this today as well, is just making the enrollment process easier for students. So one thing that we had heard is that sometimes the login was difficult, or that the enrollment form was confusing to navigate. And so we think that may have had a negative impact on yield at some places where they nominated hundreds or even thousands of students, but did not have very many students sign up. So we're going to be totally reevaluating our technology infrastructure to really look at inefficiencies and ways that we can make this a more seamless process for students to enroll. We're also going to be combining that with more and better resources that explain exactly what NNE is to students and why it's valuable. Most of what we've done now is relied on you all to communicate the importance of NNE to students on your campus. Well, we can hopefully make that easier for you by creating some of those resources ourselves, and then helping with, or having you help us with the distribution of those resources, so that we can really communicate why you should be spending your time filling out this enrollment form and providing us with this information. And then finally, one thing we have to have in the back of our mind this year is that we will be expanding the definition of underrepresented to include more students. So we have to be really clear with what students are now going to be able to participate this year that haven't been able to participate in past years. And so how do we make that clear to you so you can make that clear to students as you nominate on your campuses? The other thing that I've mentioned several times already is that we're really going to be pushing to involve more minority serving institutions next year. We're going to be doing that through some direct outreach to minority serving institutions that are CGS members, asking them about how we can make the program work at their institution, what will get them to participate, what are some barriers to participation. And so we're really hoping that we're going to be able to get that number up. We're also going to be doing some adding to the background data. We got some requests about fields of interest from students, particularly students that were interested in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, saying, I'd really like it if there was, that I could indicate that as my preferred field of study. So we're going to be evaluating all of those categories on the form this year. A big one for us is going to, for you, but for us as well, is about reducing staff burden. We know it's not only the challenge of getting students to enroll that can be difficult at an institution, but also the process of creating the list or finding the students and sending out the communications to nominate them to enroll. And so we're looking at any sorts of ways that we can to make that process easier for entity coordinators. And so some of that's going to include things like more and better templates, so you don't have to create as many things de novo. But also, listening to you all and kind of what are some things that you need that you think would be valuable. Communicating the value of NNE to students, but also maybe making the case on your campus to other administrators that it's something that you should be involved with and that it's worth spending campus time and resources on. So with that, and obviously other areas that I'm hoping to hear about now, as well as you can always email me, but we'll stop now. And I see there's some questions in the chat, but folks can also raise their hands. I know I saw there's a question about how we got non-binary students. So I think it's mostly, Erin, accidental. So the non-binary students are also supposed to be from racially and ethnically underrepresented groups. So I think all of the folks that identified themselves as non-binary were folks that were actually identified, included on the list through race ethnicity identification, but then who chose to identify themselves as non-binary. If people have questions, you can also raise your hand and I can try and answer. Oh, the question I got, how do we know if our students are enrolling in NNE from Tiffany? So this is something we'll cover even more at the orientation, but so you'll receive, once the first or second student enrolls in the National Name Exchange that you've nominated, you'll receive an email that has the login information. So you can go into the portal and you can check and see what students from your institution have enrolled. And that lets you know, first off, like, yes, you'll know that students are enrolling from your institution because you got that information, but you'll also going to be able to check what students are enrolled. So our hope is that will allow you to customize lists and follow up with students that you were expecting to see having enrolled, but haven't. We have for questions. There will be another opportunity to answer questions at the end, too, so don't feel like this is your only chance. But it does mean you're going to hear me talk. I see a hand up. Yeah, LaRuth, you can unmute.
Okay. Hi. I just had a quick question, or hopefully quick. In the data file that I downloaded from the National Name Exchange, the ethnicity field is much more complex than the kind of simplified version that you shared. And so I just wanted to clarify why we aren't consistently sharing ethnicity in that way, because I think, at least for me, that's what I'm used to, given that that's how we report on our campus and kind of the categories we use. But in the file that I download, I just see so many different options. And then in the ethnicity other field, I sometimes see cities, and, I guess it's just very confusing to me sometimes when I go through the file to really understand which students I should be keeping in the file and which students maybe I can, exclude.
Yeah, so the reason why we have that breakdown is, well, partly it's that a lot of students request very specific identifiers, but it's also in line with the IPEDS data for the fine ethnicities. And so what I do is, and this is what what takes a lot of time for this presentation is there's a corresponding identifier, and I can send the information to you if you'd like, where you can take all of those ethnicities and put them into their broader ethnicity categories. And so what you're seeing is me providing the broad ethnicity descriptors, which are all kind of self-calculated. But what we usually find is that actually, from a student perspective, it's not specific enough. So one thing I noticed going through the Indigenous students this year was that we had some tribal indicators. And so, that just leads to questions about kind of how granular can you get? And we get questions from students all the time. You'll also probably note that there were Caucasian students in there. This has been one of the confusing things for the past several years. But one thing that was interesting looking at the secondary ethnicities is that you sometimes had students that were mixed race but identified as Caucasian, or multi-ethnic and identified as Caucasian. So yeah, it is a bit confusing, but I'll send over the broad the broad ethnicities category, because it can help to sort through some of that. We got participating this year. So the enrollment deadline was July 15th, Tiffany. So the next opportunity to participate is going to be March. But there'll be a lot more information about participating in the 2024 cycle as we get towards the end of the year. Got a question here from Anthony Perez. Is there an opportunity for those at institutions who don't have students that contribute to the entity to gain access to the data? Graduate only, professional only institutions with small numbers of enrolled students. So you have to contribute students to gain access to the data. However, you do have the opportunity to contribute master students. And so what we urge folks to do is to identify master students or graduate certificate students on their campuses that may be interested in the PhD or the master's degree, and nominate those students to participate. But you do have to put data in order to get data out. Yeah, so the best practices point, that's hopefully going to be what some of the NSF work is going to be over the next year, is to be able to create more of a suite of things. But yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on just for the sake of time, but there will be opportunities to ask questions. Ruth, I'll answer your question actually quick before I move on. So is it going to be predominantly undergraduate institutions? So yes, because most of our, so it's going to be undergraduate institutions and not master's focused institutions. You will still have to be a CGS member to participate. So most community colleges, or all community colleges, are not going to be eligible to participate because they're not CGS members. That is the situation at this current time. I don't know if that's going to change, but that is the way that it's currently set up to go for the 2024 cycle. So it will be mostly undergraduate focused or undergraduate serving institutions, but all those students will be CGS member institutions that will also have graduate schools. Okay, so now I'm going to move on just to what we're up to kind of going forward. So let's look into the 2024 enrollment cycle and beyond. And so, notes here. So the big announcement that Suzanne mentioned at the outset was that the National Name Exchange is now going to also be NSF number 2336484. And so we've got an award from the National Science Foundation that was granted by the Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnership for over the next 5 years to expand and improve the National Name Exchange. In our conversations with NSF, they're really passionate about increasing the pathways of underrepresented students into STEM graduate programs and careers, and believe that the National Name Exchange is a vital resource doing. That does not mean that we're going to be limiting the participation of arts and humanities students or groups that may fall outside STEM, but just that this interest has been expressed by the National Science Foundation for the specific purpose of increasing pathways into STEM grad programs and careers. So what does this all mean? So there's going to be basically 5 major changes / expansions / augmentations that are going to be happening over the next 5 years or so that the NSF will be working with us on. So I'm going to go into these in more detail. I'll just lay them out now. The first is broadening the definition of underrepresented to include more students that have not qualified in past years or been able to participate in past years. The second is to improve the data collection in alignment with national data sets. The third are more and better resources for National Name Exchange enrollees and coordinators. The fourth is greater institutional participation in the National Name Exchange, particularly for minority serving institutions. And the fifth is more opportunities to engage with and provide feedback on National Name Exchange for NNE coordinators, as well as other graduate administrators at your institutions. So I'll just go into those in a little bit more depth. So as we move on, the 2024 cycle will see an expanded definition of underrepresented to include students from other groups that continue to be underrepresented in graduate education, including veterans, first-generation students, women in certain STEM fields, rural students, neurodiverse students, and other categories. And you'll be receiving clarity about what those new categories are at the orientation meeting, as well as through email correspondence as we get closer to the 2024 launch. So despite this expansion, I think we just want to be clear, Suzanne mentioned it in her statements, I want to reiterate it, that supporting access to graduate education for racial and ethnic minority students is central to the purpose of the National Name Exchange, and we will continue to collect that data, and we will still continue to urge you to nominate students who are from racial and ethnic minorities that have been historically underrepresented in graduate education. Broadening this, it's really a broadening. So broadening the definition will allow us to include more student groups, but it will also allow us to look at the data and understand intersectional gaps in pipelines. So looking at, for example, African-American rural students and where are the gaps there, or looking at first-generation students as they intersect with different fields of study, for example. So it will just give us more information to really understand where the big pipeline gaps are into graduate education so that we can provide that information to the National Science Foundation, as well as align it with other national data sets that are publicly accessible that look at pipeline issues or look at student demographics and other factors. So it's really going to be a broad. We do recognize that finding and sharing data in some of these categories may present challenges. And so we're going to be working and talking with you all over the next several months as we get ready for 2024 to better understand kind of what some of those issues may be, and if possible, find solutions to those data challenges. So the second is improved data collection and technology. So there's some, as all of you I'm sure have seen, we're going to be doing some work cleaning up the enrollment form, making it easier to use, really improving the user experience for the National Name Exchange, both from the student side as well as from the coordinator side. That may also take the form of some redesigned web pages as well as redesigned access portals, really just to make the whole process easier for everyone. We're also going to hopefully be adding some new fields, things like veteran status, things like first generation, as well as increasing things like fields of study options, mostly to keep in line with developments that are happening on our campuses. So, if you see that there's suddenly a bunch of new artificial intelligence certificate programs in your institution, maybe that's a sign that we're going to be putting something like artificial intelligence as a graduate field of interest. And then finally, we're going to be working with the National Student Clearinghouse to make sure that our data set is aligned with their data. And so just make it easier to understand where the data collected from NNE fits in the larger national. And so all of this is about really clarifying and making it easier to use the information from the national function. Another important factor that Suzanne mentioned that we're really excited about, and Allie's going to play a really important role in here, is creating new resources for students and coordinators. So we're going to be creating a toolkit for NNE coordinators that will have key documents and templates that will hopefully reduce staff workload, as well as make onboarding and institutionalization of the National Name Exchange on campus easier. One of the challenges we run into is sometimes there's high turnover in staff positions, and it can be a challenge to pass on the information about entity from one staff person to another. And so we're hoping that this toolkit will make it so that all you have to do is pass the toolkit on. And it'll also be available on the website. The other part of it is we really want to increase the value of the National Name Exchange to students. And one of the ways that we hope to do that is by creating a suite of resources that will help demystify the process of applying to and succeeding in graduate school. We offer a few resources now, but there's definitely more that we could do. There's the whole hidden curriculum that students are trying to navigate. And we're going to be hopefully hearing from you about some of the different resources you think would be useful in clarifying how to apply to graduate school. What are the things you need to know? And then what modalities are useful for students? Are videos useful versus written documents? So we're hoping to get information from you about what those resources should look like for students. And then we're always going to hopefully be iterating these toolkits and student-facing resources to keep up with the changing needs of the NNE coordinator community, as well as NNE enrollments. So we're always going to be asking you for feedback. Many of you email me, and I read as many emails as I can. I've been on paternity leave some this year, so things have been a little bit different. I'm always trying to take in new information about ways that we can improve NNE in future years. So we're always receptive to your feedback. Basically everything that we've done so far has been based off of suggestions that somebody in this community has made. So you're really the engines that drive what we do. So greater institutional participation, this is something that's come up several times. We're really happy about how institutional participation grew this year, and we're looking to have it expand even more next year. We're going to be having more communications go out over the next several months, trying to get more folks onboarded as NNE coordinators before the next enrollment cycle. We're also going to be establishing and better using an advisory committee to help guide CGS staff on ways to improve NNE. We've had kind of advisory committee in the past, but we struggled to really use it effectively. So we're going to be using it hopefully, both as a way to get feedback from this community, but also as a way, as this community grows more and more and more, it may be difficult to engage everybody all the time. And so it can be a kind of conduit between members of this community and staff. Hope is that not only will there be greater institutional participation, but there'll be improved student yield for institutional participants. And we know that simplifying some of the processes will go a long way to that. But we'd also just like to get a better idea of what sorts of students are interested in enrolling versus what students are being found. So we're going to be hopefully gathering some information about that. Also, I mentioned this several times, actively recruiting and engaging with minority serving institutions to encourage participation. This is a huge part of our plan for the next year, is to really engage MSIs. And then just more opportunities for you all to provide feedback on how to improve NNE. We don't want to over survey you or send out a million emails, but we do think that you're a really valuable resource that we could be using more frequently, and that we could be incorporating your feedback more than just a couple times. And so we're hoping to create a set of surveys and other tools to gain information. And so then just kind of finally, what are the kind of medium and long range goals here over the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years as this goes through? So a big one is to expand the National Name Exchange network between both institutions and NNE coordinators, and make it more inclusive of students and institutions. We're trying to get new different institutional types. We're trying to be inclusive of students that were not eligible to participate in the past. We're really trying to get a better understanding of effective practices for recruiting underrepresented students in the graduate education. Like what works and why does it work? And we think that the National Name Exchange is one of the ways that we can get a better understanding of those processes. And then finally, to disseminate best practices for underrepresented student recruitment and enrollment. Once you have a better idea of what works, let's share the wealth, let's share that knowledge and get it out there so that those students will be more successfully, more smartly recruited and enrolled in graduate institutions. So those are the kind of big goals. And so with that, I have another opportunity to ask questions before we move into the breakout groups. So questions, you can drop them in the chat or you can raise your hand. Rock noted and the Engine network. Yeah, we'll be looking at some other partner networks. McNair is another one that we're going to be looking at. How can we work and collaborate with those sorts of other networks to increase participation in it. Other questions?
Matt, there were a couple before. I know Jennifer Hunter asked a question earlier. And someone else.
Hunter. Student that does not fall under CGS definition of URM completes the enrollment to CGS. Account for that and what happens to that student's enrollment. Yeah, so Jennifer, we do not really police students that enroll. So if a student that does not fall under the appropriate definition completes enrollment, we do not remove that student. But as we said, when we hand over those lists, we don't compel you to recruit students in any way either. So if that doesn't fit into the types of students that you're looking for whatever reason, then we encourage you on the recruitment side to call those students from the list if you don't feel that they're relevant to your needs. But there's a few students. I was looking back as I looked through the data for this. There's at least a handful of international students in there. There's probably more, but there's a handful of students that are very clearly international. That put foreign mailboxes in their address forms, but there's also the whole Caucasian question. If they qualify, the multi-ethnic category provide a little bit of insight into that, but there's definitely some students that identified as multi-ethnic as like French and German, which is not really what we're looking for. But we don't. So let's do one more minute or so for questions if folks have it before we move into the breakout. Sure. I said again, we always are happy to field questions via email as well. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to start moving us to. I saw something. So I'm going to start moving us to breakouts. These are the questions that I'm looking for us to discuss in the breakout groups. I think first off, just introducing yourselves to one another. I'm going to do it as kind of randomized breakout. But I'm looking for kind of what worked well during the 2023 enrollment cycle. What were your biggest pain points? How could they be addressed? What resources would help make your role as an entity coordinator easier? And then what resources do you think would help students better understand the process? So if you're not looking to participate in the breakout groups, I'd recommend signing up now. But I'm going to do about 15 minutes of breakouts, and then we'll do a report out. So in your breakouts, if you'll designate a reporter, that would be helpful. So we're going to create, how many we got? 33.